I think he's what a Democrat, if you were to put him in the United States
Yeah.
context, he's British. I think
Yeah.
that he's what a Democrat was 20 years ago, and he just
Okay.
hasn't really changed much. And
Yeah.
he's still applying his principles, but in ways that are not in sync with how the current mainstream left is. So, I think all the major new atheists have gone the same way. He's no different than the rest. He's no different than Sam Harris in these regards. He's no different than Bill Maher. Um, this is what Peter Boghossian. He's no
Yeah.
different than the direction that all these major thought leaders have gone in. He's just in a different context now, so people are taking it differently.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 224. I'm talking to Jake Klein, who, well, first of all, he's the fiance of Salome Siboney, who was on here recently. So this is the first time I've had a sort of married couple on the show, albeit in different shows. But he's going to talk about a few things. He was recently on doing a show with Richard Dawkins, and there was an article in the Atlantic criticizing Jake. He's also worked with the Ayn Rand Institute and the Foundation for Economic Education in the past. He's got a blog. He's got a Substack called WTF Black Sheep or something like that.
No, there is a WT, but it's short for We the Black Sheep.
We the Black Sheep. Okay, sorry.
WeTheBlackSheep.com.
Yeah. He's also coming out with a book called Redefining Racism. It sounds like he's a busy man. He's in the belly of the beast in Washington, D.C. right now. How are you, Jake?
I'm really good. Thank you. Book's out already. Available at WeTheBlackSheep.com.
Yeah. Okay. So you and Salome were doing these shows with Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins is going on this final tour, I guess, because Dawkins is what? He's in his 80s now, or?
He is 83 years old, but seemingly in great health. I mean, great stage presence still. Much better than Biden at the same age. I can tell you that much.
Yeah. So you were at a show in DC, I believe.
Yes.
And you were like the opening act for Dawkins, which how did you get that gig?
Oh, so I've known, I don't know if I should say his name because I don't know if it's public or not, but the producer of these events is somebody that I've worked with in the past when I was at an organization called the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism.
Yes.
So he's a friend, and he's familiar with my work, and I made him familiar with Salome's work. And so he's been asking a bunch of people to do these openings that he thinks, have interesting things to say, can give like a little TED Talky style presentation before Richard goes on in as many cities as he can get a good opener. So Salome did Austin and I did DC, and I think both went great, and it was a really fun opportunity for both of us.
Yeah. So you did this show, and the Atlantic came out with this article criticizing you and Dawkins.
And criticizing me for sure. I was a vehicle to get to Dawkins, I think. But some not so nice things said about me too.
But you're not. I don't think you're as well known as Dawkins. I mean, you've got to look at it and say, well, hey, publicity. The Atlantic is talking about me.
I do. I don't feel particularly bothered about it. I mean, I'm bothered by a lot of things related to it. I got compared to J.D. Vance, who, not like the worst person in the world, but I thought that was kind of a strange association. I don't really share his particular brand of politics, so I was bothered by that. I was bothered by the journalistic integrity of the writer, which I think was just appalling. They put lines in direct quotes from me in quotation marks that were approximately what I said, but were not direct quotes. I mean, when I wrote my book, I was so careful with that kind of stuff. I was debating with my editors, like they say, oh, the rule of grammar is, you put in a quotation mark, a period inside the quotation mark to end a sentence, even if it wasn't part of the original quote. And I'm like, I don't want to misrepresent how that sentence was originally written. I want the period to go outside the quote. And, I was debating that with my editor. So that's how seriously I take that stuff. So even if it didn't have like a major impact on the substance of the piece, it's kind of journalistic malpractice to do that. Also, just other little falsehoods. They said that I was a creationist in the past. I was never a creationist in the past. So just really appalling. That is not a person that should be working at the Atlantic, and I think you should be fired.
That is a magazine that 5 years ago I had a lot of respect for, and I can't think of any magazine that was at least seemed like it was. I didn't always agree with it, but sometimes they'd have some really good stuff. And then after coronavirus, it just became absolute garbage. It really did.
I've seen this. I've seen about the same. I don't know exactly when to date it to or what to date it to, but I used to get linked to articles from there all the time that I thought were great. Connor Friesdorf, John McWhorter, Thomas Chatterton Williams, and I think Thomas Chatterton Williams still writes there, but for the most part, it's just way less good stuff than there used to be.
Yeah, well, with a lot of magazines and stuff, it's usually not a clean sweep. It's people just trickle out slowly, and then you notice it's what happened here, because people may not notice. I know. I think we're all getting maybe more into our echo chambers, but it was really and basically what they're criticizing Dawkins for is they're criticizing him for not, because the atheist movement, which I have to admit, it seems like I'm on less and less good terms with them. But the atheist movement has definitely become more, it got taken over by all this woke nonsense years ago. And it's like, you have to be woke to be an atheist anymore. And there's a lot of people who post stuff like that. I've seen Matt Dillahunty say stuff like that, and Dawkins has actually not really embraced any of that. What do you think Dawkins does believe? I mean,
I think Dawkins is exactly the same person that he was 20 years ago. Yep. I don't think anything's changed. I think the culture surrounding us has changed. And I think that he sees himself, and I think I agree with how he sees himself, as following through on the same principles that he was talking about back then, which is being concerned about anti-scientific, dogmatic thinking, and trying to call out nonsense when he sees nonsense. So in this Atlantic article, one of the things that the writer really criticized was that Dawkins talked about on stage this thing that happened in New Zealand, where they were trying to teach the Maori creation myth in public schools in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And, they were saying like, oh, he used to be going against like creationists in the United States, but now he's, punching down against these indigenous groups. And that to me are the people that's betraying the values that we cared about 20 years ago. It shouldn't matter who it's coming from. Like if you were against the teaching of non-science, the teaching of creationism in public schools, then you should be against it regardless of whoever's teachings it is, like oppressed or not oppressed. That was wild to me. And it's just interesting to see how much these woke atheists have totally betrayed the values that kind of created any organized movement, insofar as there was anything organized 20 years ago.
Well, maybe it's not among the atheists, but the most curious thing about the woke is their sympathies toward the so-called religion of peace, Islam. It seems like it's all really just about what they're against, and the only thing that the only mysticism that's bad is Christianity and maybe Orthodox Judaism. Is that about right?
I don't know what they think. I mean, boy, the conversation around Judaism is so like all over the map these days that it's hard to pin people down, because on the right you see all this pro-Israel stuff, which ends up then going into like, Judaism is this like civilization saving, like most important ideas like ever. Like Douglas Murray said that in something that like Judaism was somehow more important than Christianity or something, and like the bedrock of Western culture.
Yeah.
And that pissed a lot of people off, I remember. And so you see that. At the same time, you also kind of see the rise of a more anti-Semitic far right. It doesn't really have power in any serious way, but it is growing. I see it all over Twitter in a way that I never used to. And so that's very concerning. Then meanwhile, on the left, I think you can see some people that they apply it to their culturally Marxist framework, where Jews have power, and so, they're oppressors, and but then at the same time, of course, you also see like, oh, we don't, the classical, usual left, like we don't judge people like based off any of these things. We don't think about, the religious group or whatever. So it's all kind of all over the map now. It's hard to pin anyone down just based on like what side of the aisle they're on alone.
True. But, the most interesting thing about Israel is it's actually one of the few modern Western countries that still has a birth rate that's well over 2.5, and it's because of these, the really conservative Orthodox Jews, the ones that wear the black hats and have the beards, are having lots of kids. The more secular or modern Jews are their birth rates are basically, it's going down the tubes like everywhere else in Europe, and I saw a map recently, and the only, and it's even questionable whether you could call it a European country that had a birth rate more than 2.0 was, as I like to call it, Sakartvelo, but we also call it Georgia. Every other country in Europe was less than 2.0.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm very concerned by those trends. I don't, there were obviously these religious teachings that teach people to have a bunch of kids. And what I spoke about, I don't know if you had the opportunity to read the text of the speech that I gave in front of Richard Dawkins, but I talked a lot. It was about, okay, there were actually important things in religious narratives that structured our culture and had some value that wasn't perfect, but it was also accompanied by a lot of false fact claims. I mean, that's kind of the most important part of them, is that you have to have faith in these claims that, we just know now aren't true or are highly implausible. And you also can't question any of the systems because they're divine. And so, but we can't throw out the baby with the bathwater, and that we need to come up with a new story, our society, a new story that's not based in false facts claims, that's not based in nonsense, but that can preserve what was important from these older stories, that was valuable, that did help people live good lives and build a good society and civilization. But in a secular package that can survive in this scientific era where people just aren't believing in those stories anymore. It's just so much harder to believe in them than it was 500 years ago. And I think having a lot of kids is one of those things. I think that's very important. I think if you want to build a functioning civilization, you have to do that. And so it's disappointing to me to see among secular people such low birth rates, while amongst, religious cults that are going to be raising people, like these black hat ultra Orthodox Jews in this very restrictive lifestyle, very cult-like lifestyle, often don't teach them much or anything about secular subjects, science, math. Sometimes even in America, in Brooklyn, sometimes they don't even learn English. They just learn like Hebrew and Yiddish. And that's horrible, because then they have no choice in life. They can't leave, they can't pursue something different. And I was raised modern Orthodox. I wasn't raised quite in that lifestyle, but I hear the stories of people that have left that, and boy, they go through hard times. So it's sad for me to see such high birth rates there, where I wish they were lower, and such low birth rates where I wish they were higher.
it really makes me wonder where we're going with this. Yeah, and I do think, the church does provide some things that you really don't find anywhere else. I mean, I don't know. I mean, once you get out of school, it's actually hard to find a social life that doesn't revolve around getting drunk. But church is one of those places where you do find a social life that, as an adult, that doesn't really revolve around getting drunk. And you have these, little clubs and organizations, and people have their baby showers and their weddings, and churches will have charities. I mean, I know church groups, who went down to do, earthquake relief in Haiti, and you see some of them showing up, in places like Appalachia right now. And I mean, I wish I saw more atheist groups doing this, but I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I know you have like secular humanism that sort of tries to do that, but
Yeah.
they're, I think, like, very leftist and like kind of wacky. So, I haven't looked too
Yeah.
seriously into joining anything like that. But I do think we need more community organizations. I think a lot of the problem is the state. A lot of the things that people used to have to come together uh, for has now been taken over by the state, and so it's hard to form like new such organizations organically. We used to have mutual aid societies. It used to be that everybody wanted to join up locally into a community thing, in part because we didn't have programs like Social Security and Medicaid. And so when people fell on hard times, it would be their local community that would help them, and people would be in these organizations, number one, out of a sense of caring for other people in their community, but also in case that they ever fell on hard times, so as a form of insurance. So I think I really think that the state is responsible for a lot of this. But it's such a large cultural shift. Like, even if we rolled back the state, it would still be a lot of work to get people to pick up these patterns again. It's very easy to destroy and it's hard to build. And unfortunately, the kind of localism and community functions that we used to have been destroyed through multiple mechanisms. And I do think we need to rebuild them. I think it's very important. We need to rebuild them in a different way. That's more, again, not religious, because I think the religion's sticking very deeply to these fact claims that we know not to be true, or again, highly implausible. That's really part of what's led to a lot of the downfall. And if they hadn't done that so much, I mean, and religions are kind of all over the map in this. Like, you have some that are still denying evolution, and then you have some that have tried to like merge evolution into the stories that they're telling, and say, oh no, we're interpreting the Bible differently now. But ultimately, that's not going like nearly far enough. I mean, we just think about facts differently now. We have more empirical methods of analysis than just kind of claiming that there's a God in the sky that does these highly implausible things. So I think if communities had been willing to let religion go a little bit and continue doing what they were doing, but around a slightly altered set of ideas, they might have survived better. But instead, they've been in such free fall decline and influence.
Yeah. Also, the decline of some fraternal organizations. I had David Beto talk about how some lodges would have doctors, and you'd have lodge doctors, and organizations like the Eagles, the Elks, I mean, some of them are still fairly active, but they're not as active as they used to be. I don't know what happened there. It's like the fathers just stopped taking their boys to these things or something, or for whatever reason the boys decided they didn't want to get involved anymore. It's kind of weird why that happened, but
I'm watching. I think another thing that may have led to this is it's a consequence of wealth and us living
Yeah.
in such a wealthy society. So I'm watching now with Salome a show that I'm a big fan of. I've seen it before. It's Gilmore Girls. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. If you're familiar, it's about
I
this.
know of it. Yeah.
Okay, so for potential viewers, it's about this single mother and her daughter and their relationship. Okay, and the thing is that the single mother doesn't have a great relationship with her parents. She ran away when she was young because she got pregnant as a teenager, and also because they had a very like stifling, like upper class lifestyle. And something that you can see very clearly in this show is that when you see those grandparents, like their upper class life, they're all doing business with each other. They're all things have to be done in a formal way. There's a lot of ego involved. There's a lot of like, we're kind of showing status to other people. And this is, I think, it's a consequence of their wealth, and it's how they got their wealth and the personality traits that they had to have. As where when you look at the more middle and lower classes that are in where the two main characters, the mother and daughter, are living now, is a very tightly knit town. Everybody's friends with each other in the community. They might have little fights with each other at town halls, but they all care about each other. They have fun parties, and it's much more sort of like human and connected. And I think that this is a trope that you see in a lot of media. It was in the movie Titanic, when you look at like the lower decks and the upper decks and how they behave.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that's very true to reality, where people are kind of brought together a little bit by necessity. And then once they're brought together by necessity, it becomes just sort of a habit of personality and something that you get, a way that you get trained to be. And if you're very wealthy, you don't necessarily get trained to be that way. And so in a society that is, even if not everybody might be feeling it all the time, even when things get worse and, as our standard of living rises, our ability to meet it will sometimes decline. But overall, it's been clear looking at the numbers that everyone in America is getting much, much wealthier. And where do you see the most community today? You see it amongst, I think, immigrant groups. And there's a bunch of different reasons for that, but I think one might be wealth related, is, they still kind of need each other and need to bind together in communities more, as where once people have earned enough money, they don't feel the pressure and then don't learn the same habits.
Yeah, and I think maybe they want to keep their customs alive. They want to. I still think they probably want to teach their kids their old language too, so they can keep their old language alive, which I'm not certainly fine with that. But yeah, it's there's a lot of reasons, and maybe there's just more of a trust there. Certainly when if I was in Mongolia once, and I saw that guy, and he just happened to be wearing a blue and gold shirt, and then I went and got my blue and gold shirt, and I'm like, we both realized, oh, that's from West Virginia. This is from West Virginia, and we're in Mongolia. And I'm like thinking, wow, I met this guy in Mongolia, and we were like friends instantly.
Mm-hmm.
It was so you kind of have that, if you're or if you're traveling in Europe and you happen to meet somebody from your hometown, or it's like, wow, hey, how you doing? There's just a bond there that happens. And yeah, it does seem to it does seem to be isolated there. I never realized that money can be more of an isolating factor. But there is some necessity that happens in these communities. And you even look at something, like the Kowloon walled city in Hong Kong, or something, or some of these other little church communities out on the hill someplace, or something like on the show Little House on the Prairie. Because I think necessity did bring people together, and unfortunately, sometimes it can be, if your town gets wiped out by a hurricane, there's stuff that happens there too. You don't really hire some, but interesting enough, I don't know if you're involved with the Unitarian Universalist Church, but that seems like that's become for a lot of people the church for atheists.
No, that's what I was trying to talk about before when I said secular humanists, or I guess that's maybe not the right term. It's those Unitarian Universalists. That's what I was talking about. They seem kind of, again, I haven't looked into it too deeply, but to what extent I did, they seemed like kind of pretty lefty, and
Yeah.
it seems like a bit too much still.
There's also very much a knee-jerk rebellion among a lot of groups, and you certainly see it among atheists. I mean, uh, atheism really doesn't say anything about your view on gun rights, but you'll certainly meet a lot of atheists who say guns are bad. And
Hmm.
it's just because, well, I see all these religious people saying guns are good, so therefore guns are bad. And I think it's just really simply a knee jerk.
Yeah, the other thing that's going on um, is that we're living more of our lives online.
Yeah,
And so, because more of our communication and contact are with people very far away from us, we're able to kind of develop ideas that are not necessarily in sync with the people immediately next to us, our physical neighbors. And so, when we have such different ideas on all sorts of values, gun rights, could be one example. Um, but it's a whole just scope of values. It's hard to come together into a community that really has a shared value system. And so instead, we see those communities get built online, but people only know each other through text, or very limited forms of interaction. And so it's not the same quality of community that we used to have. I think this is actually probably going to get fixed a little bit as we move into the future through technology, but it's going to be a scary, like Brave New World kind of way, where I think as we move into higher degrees of usage of VR, I have an Oculus Quest 2, and I've played around with it a little. And, even with the very sort of low tech chip that it has in it, it's like a mobile phone chip that has to process all the VR stuff and all the graphics. So the people that you see in there, they're kind of like blocky characters and stuff like that. It looks like a video game from like 3 generations ago, and I mean 3 video game generations, not human generations. So maybe like 15 years ago. Um, but still, even with graphics at that level, you have a much greater sense of
mhm.
presence with people. Like, you can look them in the eyes, you can have conversations with them, and it feels like you're in the same room. It feels like they're in the same room much more even than it is with like you and I right now, where I'm talking to you. I have a teleprompter set up, and so I'm looking through my teleprompter, at your face. um, and I still don't really feel like I'm in the same room with you, but in VR you really, really do. And so, as that gets more advanced and people spend more of their time in that, we'll kind of be able to form communities that have more of the sense of feeling and closeness of local physical communities, but it'll be with people that are actually all over the world. And that's really scary, because that's people living their lives in a digital world and not a physical world. um, so I don't know how that's going to work out for the species or for our happiness or all sorts of other things, but I do think it will sort of be a little bit healing for this immediate current problem of the death of local physical communities.
Yeah, because the local physical community is still something, if what do you do if your car breaks down? What do you do if your house is on fire? It's still something that needs to be there, but it could be very, unless we get to this point that we can, you know, beam around and teleport. But
Yeah.
until that happens, but because I do think people do unify in common interests.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
people are using their cars less and less. And as we have work remote for an enormous
yeah,
amount of people right now. I haven't worked in an office since before COVID. So, and even people that are, they're more often than not, they're hybrid now. So they're not in every day. So again, we just keep living our lives more and more in these digital worlds. But right now they're just on a screen. We're not really like in them. And I think that's going to change. It might take some time, but I think we're moving into these digital worlds. And so a lot of that stuff you mentioned won't matter. I mean, your house burning down if you cook will matter, but we're still gonna have firefighters and stuff. But I don't drive my car that often. I basically only drive my car recreationally, or there's work things now and then for sure, but it's rare. So I don't know. We're moving into a strange world. Things are getting better in some ways. They're getting worse in other ways, but more than anything, they're just getting weird. I mean, if you were to look at how we live our lives now from 100 years ago, I think your first reaction might be that that's neither good nor bad. It's just weird. Like, this is not what life was like for the entire rest of human history.
Have you read the Kaczynski Manifesto?
I think I've read some pages of it. I've read about it.
Okay.
I've not read the entire thing.
That was just it's definitely an interesting how technology has disconnected us, although we don't certainly advocate for what he did, but something I've noticed, and I think at my age, I have a benefit of really being able to see the differences and really be able to understand how everything has changed, because I can still remember, mechanical Singer typewriters that, you didn't even plug in, and they were really heavy too. And now, where we are, I see a breakdown in communication, because in the early days of dial-up internet, you might go in an email discussion group, and I would write 2 or 3 paragraphs. You would write and then maybe 6 hours later, you would write 2 or 3 paragraphs. And then maybe a few hours later, I would write 2 or 3 paragraphs. You would write 2 or 3 paragraphs. And I think there would actually be somewhat of a nuanced discussion there. Now it's like 2 or 3 words, 2 or 3 words, 2 or 3 words, 2 or 3 words, 2 or 3 words. And to me, that is just, I think that is not good communication at all. And maybe people just say to me, "You're old." I said, "No, I don't think it works." What do you think about that?
Oh, well, I agree with that completely. The incentive structure is bad. I mean, Twitter really helped create that problem when they limited the character count so much. And now that's over, and you can have long tweets, at least if you pay. But, and I guess most people still don't pay. But regardless, a culture was created on the platform that was unhealthy. So I think that's bad. I remember when Clubhouse rolled out. Do you remember Clubhouse?
Yes, Clubhouse. Yeah, yeah, Clubhouse is
Yeah.
still, yeah,
Yeah, it still exists, I think, but
yeah,
now we have Twitter/X Spaces, which are basically the same thing. So they
yeah.
co-opted that idea, but it was, these verbal chat rooms where you'd be on your mic. And I remember going into Clubhouse, and it was so refreshing coming off the other social media platforms, because people were generally so much friendlier to each other. Because when you heard people's voices, number one, you just sort of had to recognize them more as a real person. You heard tone, so not everything was read in like an aggressive, hostile manner. And people could have longer, like, thoughtful conversations with each other. And still, on X Spaces, I mean, there's certainly, people like to tune into drama. So when there's going to be heated ones, people will tune in more. But nonetheless, you have a much better quality of dialogue in that form. So I think, yeah, I think these like text communications
Yeah.
have always been bad for us, but it's really bad when it's so short and
Yeah.
so impersonal.
I think, I actually think it's more, and I know this sounds conspiracy theorist, but they really, really want to get us off of real computers. Uh, they want to get us onto phones and
Mm.
iPads and stuff that they can kind of control. And I mean, you can still use a computer and be completely disconnected, and they do not want us to have that ability. Because you can sit and actually type on a computer. If you know how to type, you can write something long and nuanced. And I will go do that, and sometimes try to write a thoughtful answer, and somebody else will write a thoughtful answer, and you actually think about it. But it's definitely, I think that's really the evolution, is just going over to phones.
I don't think they're totally like trying to get us off
Yep.
computers. I mean, there's still certain things that you wouldn't want to do on a phone. I mean, I do a lot of video editing. I mean, there's
Yeah.
video editing apps on a phone, but I'm not going to use Adobe Premiere there. I mean, that would be crazy. And also for writing, I mean, it's the same companies that manufacture these things. So they want to sell whatever they can sell, and they charge more for the full computers. I have an
Yeah.
iPhone and I have a Mac. The Mac is twice the price of the iPhone. Even Google, yeah, they have Android phones. They also have Chromebooks. In their case, I think the Chromebooks are cheaper. But so these companies, they all manufacture both. I think they want to sell what they can sell. What I think is different, though, is that the idea that we have a computer on us all the time that is handheld. The software companies, they're the ones that, they want your attention span, particularly with social media, but anything that's on an ad-based platform, because they want you to look at as many ads because your time is money in that way. I'm very concerned about that, and I have major problems with phone addiction. I am on that stuff like a lot more than I probably should be, and on the one hand, like I like it, and so I don't want to stop using it. I think that I would lose substantial utility if I stopped using it, but it becomes very hard to find where exactly the balance should be, and then when you don't have when you don't know exactly where that is or where the right place is, it's really easy to fall prey to the addiction aspect, where I just have such an instinct, for dopamine, I think, to just keep
Yeah.
checking my phone of like, have I gotten a notification? And that's really bad. I have, I'm diagnosed with some sort of, it's in the DSM as otherwise
Yeah.
unspecified executive functioning disorder. So it's sort of like ADHD, but like if it didn't quite beat all the things, and so you just need a
Yeah.
billing code to put it in. But so I do have like a dopamine regulation like disorder, and so it's very hard for me, and I don't totally know what the answer is. I believe in free market solutions for this sort of stuff. I know there's like app blocking uh, apps, where it'll put up a thing if I try to open Twitter or something that says you're not allowed to use this now, or are you sure you want to use this, or it can block it off at certain times of day. And I think that's very good. I think that's the starting of free market solutions, but I don't think they're quite where they need to be in terms of they need to work a little bit differently than they are now, because you always have a specific reason that you need to open it at a certain time. And if they could be a little bit more context sensitive,
Yeah.
I think they would work a lot better.
Yeah. I have to admit, I often wonder if I've really been a screen addict since the 70s. I mean, obviously when it was just TV, but you can certainly, it's very easy to do that. Although you certainly seem like a normal guy, but and I do think part of what's made us maybe a little angrier is that I think it's so easy now to make noise. Uh, and a lot of what is on the internet is just noise that we wouldn't have had to hear, you know, 40 years ago. I mean, I remember for whatever reason, I got a car and it actually had a second spare tire. I don't know why it did, but, it was in the trunk, and I said, well, I can get rid of this thing, so I go out on Facebook Marketplace and, say, okay, $50, who wants a spare tire? And almost immediately, as soon as I post that, I get some jerk off. You must really be desperate for money if you're selling your spare tire. And first of all, that right there is immediate block. I mean, but I'm convinced that some of these that there are that there are people doing this just to agitate. They're just doing it to make more noise, and and eventually I did sell the spare tire, but just like what good is this when all I get is this worthless noise that doesn't accomplish anything? And you get a whole lot of that on the internet, and sometimes it's not as bad as that, but it's just you there's a whole lot of that. I don't know how I don't think we had that problem 40 years ago. It seemed like it's maybe making us a little more hostile toward each other just because, oh God, it's another phone call, or oh, I think you know what I'm getting at here.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's definitely making us more hostile towards each other. It's fun in a way where it takes a little bit more. There's people that will do it in person, but this trolling behavior of, when I'm disconnected from somebody and it's just text and I can write something kind of crazy to get a reaction out of them. I don't really do this myself that much, but I always think about it, and I make jokes with Salome about like, post that, because it'll get a reaction. And then I don't do it, but other people do. And so we think that there's all these crazy people on the internet that sometimes they're not even really crazy. They're just trolling for fun. And it is fun. I get it. And that sort of grows out of this 4chan culture and this internet culture that's been around for a while. And, I think the biggest thing is that, and there's just so many, like it's text, it's the lack of connection with each other. But I think another one of the biggest things is that we weren't all meant to be in this big pool of everyone. We weren't evolved for a society where you can interact with all the billions of people in the world all at once, and you'll scroll past them in your feed. We were evolved for small tribes.
Yep.
And our communication was evolved for decision making in small tribes. And so when you apply that tribal behavior outside the tribe, it doesn't really work. We end up in these hostile fights with everyone because we get so defensive, where we feel like we're defending, what's worked for our tribes, or like our tribe's values at an evolutionary sense. And at the same time, we're so often wrong about what like works for our tribes because we don't have these same evolutionary pressures that we used to, right? It used to be that like if your tribe held really bad ideas, then they might not survive. And now you can hold really bad ideas. You can be a Marxist in the West and you'll do just fine. Doesn't matter. You might even do better than somebody else until your ideas actually, take power. So I think that's a problem for us. And I do think we need to start to exist again in these smaller communities that are more in line with what we're evolved for. And I believe in classical liberalism. And I think that, for that to work, where the little tribes don't want to, we don't get back to what we think of as tribal behavior, where the tribes are all warring with each other and all the horrible stuff that we've had in history. We really have to value this classical liberal idea way better than we've been doing. Because right now, I think a big part of what turns the political temperature up, we mix this, we're putting everybody in the same pot, coupled with everybody in the pot actually has the ability to control our lives in a horrible way because of democracy. And so we feel that we have to know everything about what the other tribes believe because they're trying to take control of the power structure and they're going to push their policies through and control us. And if we could really return to this true classical liberal idea of, we're going to have all these small groups of people, and these small groups of people can organize themselves how they see fit, and you can freely exit from these groups and re-enter to other groups. But at the top level, we're not going to let any of these groups control each other. We're all kind of bound by the respect, by the classical liberalism for the idea that y'all live life your way and you'll let us live life our way. I think that's the way forward past a lot of this stuff. But right now we're in a super toxic combination where we don't have that at all.
Yeah, it's we're definitely in that, and the socialists often like to bring up that trope, that it takes a village to raise a child. Said, yeah, they meant a village. They didn't mean a nation of 300 million people. They meant a village. There is a difference. But, I wanted to ask you about something else. You were raised and you said you called it an Orthodox Jewish upbringing. But Dawkins influenced you to leave that. What happened there? What can you tell me about that? How did you get to where you are today?
Well, religiously, so I was raised modern Orthodox. So to quickly describe what that is, so we were talking before about the ultra-Orthodox, the people that you'll see in Brooklyn or parts of Israel or, a couple other places where, they wear this old, Eastern European style clothing that they would wear in the shtetls with the black hats and, the suits and the whole look, okay? And they're very insular, very isolated communities, okay? I was not raised in that, but the community that I was raised in believes in the same basic theology that those people believe in, okay? But, we would dress more modern and, people would get normal jobs and interact in the normal world, okay? There's other branches of Judaism too, which is why it's important to sort of say that both modern Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox, they have their disagreements, but they recognize each other as being, proper adherents of Judaism theologically. There's also like Reform Judaism, which is kind of like we're throwing out the entire old theology and we're just going to kind of practice like Jewish vibes, So that's a different thing. Then there's like Conservative Judaism, which is another popular branch, which has a more coherent theology than Reform Judaism, but it's different than the Orthodox theology that has been practiced, they believe in an unbroken tradition since the Talmud. So, okay. So my background is in that modern Orthodox branch. And there is not a period of time where I remember myself as having ever enjoyed this religion in basically any way. There would be little holidays that I would like, I like Hanukkah, but it's, I get gifts, but it's always sort of accompanied with the knowledge that, everyone else around us is celebrating Christmas. And, it's not that I necessarily want to celebrate Christmas per se, but, I'll ask my parents, like, why don't we get a tree also? And they'll say, no, that's what the Christians do. We don't do that. Okay. And then there's all these weird rituals or requirements that we have to follow. Orthodox Judaism is a very restrictive lifestyle, right? So foods, I'm sure you're familiar with like the basic rules of kosher. You can't eat meat and milk together. You can't eat pork. You can't eat shellfish, etc. Right? But it's not only that. It's that, the rabbis have said, well, how do we know that things are following these rules? A rabbi has to observe the production process. And so that's a little label that you put on food, boxes of food that's called a hechsher that will tell you if this was rabbi certified or not. Most major companies do it, but not every company. And, so I can only eat foods if they have this thing. On Shabbat, it's not just a day of rest. It's a very restrictive day of rest where, you can't carry a bag when you go outside unless you live in a walled city, but also certain areas, they put a wire around town. It's called an Erev, so that, we're religiously mimicking the requirement of like a walled city, but you have to know if you're inside one or not to know. And you spend so much time. It's so burdensome thinking about these rules and how you follow all these rules. And then meanwhile, I'm practicing this in a community that's not isolated from the rest of the world, right? So they're not as easily able to brainwash me into believing this bullshit. I'm able to interact with more mainstream thought. And I just go and ask my parents and I ask, the teachers at my school, why are we doing this? This doesn't make sense to me. And I think I'm a very logical thinker. And I think I was a logical thinker from a young age too, even if I got things wrong sometimes, but I always want to understand everything. And they could never give me explanations that made sense. And it all sort of rooted back to just, this is what we do. And this is what we do because God declared certain rules, and then the rabbis derived certain rules from trying to follow those rules. And even if the rabbis got things wrong in their analysis of the biblical rules, it doesn't matter because it sort of works like a common law system, Orthodox theology, where, you know, if they decided something, even if like modern scientific knowledge would say, oh, that rule didn't actually need to be followed that way, you still follow it because it's been, you know, it's been formed as like part of the common law. So, and that's a bad explanation. I don't want to hear we follow things because they're wrong, but a rabbi from 1500 years ago said that that's the way the rule was, and they formed a tradition of following it that way for 1,000 years before they found out, like, no, that's not actually how fire works or something, right? And so, you know, I never liked this. And, you know, when I reached an age where I could form my own independence, I started to break away from it. And then I read Richard Dawkins, and not just Dawkins, but also, you know, seeing Sam Harris do like debates, and Christopher Hitchens too. I wasn't, of the new atheists, I wasn't as familiar with Dennett. I don't know much about his work, but the other three, you know, I was real deep in everything they were kind of doing on the public stage. But mostly I was watching like their debates and reading articles and stuff like that. I wasn't reading all the books, except for The God Delusion. I read The God Delusion. And that book gave me such a deeper understanding of what was going on. And, you know, the word meme wasn't super popular back then. It hadn't formed into what it is now, but it gave me an understanding of like the memetics of religion and why this is replicating, even though it's in conflict with scientific ways of thought and scientific knowledge. And so once I had that understanding, as well as an understanding of how religion was causing this horrible conflict between groups, you know, and also Dawkins says in that book, and this is very bold, you know, that it's basically tantamount to child abuse to teach children to believe in all these falsehoods. And, you know, I don't know if it rises to the level of child abuse, but, you know, I certainly think infant circumcision is child abuse. And a lot of the things that these religions do and Judaism does are child abuse. So, you know, that made me angry. The Atlantic Lighter said I said on stage that it radicalized me against Orthodox Judaism. That's not what I said on stage. What I said on stage was it gave me a deeper understanding and gave me the courage and my convictions to break free and pursue my own happiness. And that is what it did. But it did do that in part through making me angry enough to realize, like, no, this is wrong. I don't want to be a part of this. There's a better way for people to be. There's a better way for you to be, to my parents and to my teachers. And like, this is what you're doing is wrong and you ought to know better. And I know that you do know better because, again, they're not the people that were raised in the most cultish version of it. They were raised around scientific secular knowledge. They had the ability and they chose not to take it. And I can get into the reasons why that is, because I think that's particularly complicated in the case of Judaism, why people stick with it over generation after generation, even though like they kind of know enough to know better and even in their heads don't really believe it. But so I didn't, and I took a stand against it and was willing to say out loud to the people that were trying to push this on to me that, you know, this is wrong and I don't want to be a part of this. And, you know, it's thanks to that, you know, I think I'm able to live the life that I live today, which isn't perfect. You know, as I'm talking about, there are certain things from a religion that, you know, I don't have and that I think is important to salvage. But if the only way for me to get that was the package deal of all of Judaism, I am extraordinarily grateful that Dawkins gave me the courage to be able to say this is wrong and I don't want to be a part of this anymore.
Was there anybody else you read along the way, or?
Well, I said Harris and
Harris.
Hitchens.
Hitchens.
And
Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens.
Peter Boghossian was writing back then articles, I know, and he's somebody that's since become a friend of mine. He wrote a blurb for my book. So Boghossian is one of the like rare examples of like, I have so many stories and I don't want to tell them on camera of like meeting my heroes and being very disappointed. Boghossian is an example where I met my heroes and I actually got to be like friends with them and know them quite well, and being very happy. He's a great human being. So that, and then later, because this may be who you're looking for. Later, when I was in college, I read Ayn Rand, and Ayn Rand gave me a different philosophical understanding of the situation that I think was very important to me, and also in terms of that saying this is wrong, you know, she did give me a more moral understanding of that too, in a more complicated way. But I was already in college by that point, so I wouldn't say that she was a person that got me there, but was a person that furthered my thinking once I was already well there.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, I don't know how much Ayn Rand had an influence, but certainly Thomas Jefferson. Believe it or not, De Sade. You know, the dialogue between the priest and the dying man. If you've ever read De Sade.
I have not. I know vaguely who he is.
Marquis de Sade. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I know he's sexually sadist or whatever.
Yeah,
but that's all I know.
He's crazy, but the dialogue is actually quite interesting. It's you know, it's funny. People can seem sane when they write, and then they're crazy in their lifestyle. But yeah, it's I don't know. And then I read George Smith's book. So, and of course, he was heavily influenced by Ayn Rand. I don't know. Who influenced your politics, or how'd you get into free market stuff?
Ron Paul, 100%. So that was, you know, when I was a teenager, I was very left liberal, I would say. You know, I was watching, you know, The Daily Show all the time. You know, I was basically wherever Jon Stewart was in like 2006, right? And I think the political right was much worse then. You know, it was this evangelical Christian dominance. It was the warmongering of George W. Bush. So a lot of those politics I keep today, but those views have become much more acceptable on the right to think differently on certain matters. But so Ron Paul, you know, then he runs for president, and I have no economic understanding because on the left, they have no economic understanding. The best they have is Paul Krugman, who's wrong about everything. So they, you know, I would literally say things like, you know, we have all this poverty, like, why don't they just print the money to fix it and give everybody health care? Like, the only reason that they would do this is because they don't care about people. So, you know, that's literally what I thought when I was a teenager. And when I saw Ron Paul go on the debate stage, I saw somebody that agreed with me on war, agreed with me on the really important issues to me, agreed on drug legalization and these more civil libertarian things that were more popular on the left then than they are now, where they've, you know, there's no free speech belief on the left anymore, which is very disappointing. And so I felt like I was seeing somebody on that Republican debate stage that represented at least part of what I thought. And so even if, you know, I ended up volunteering for the Barack Obama campaign and for the 2008 election and voting for Obama, but, you know, I was always like, but I like that Ron Paul guy. If it had to be any Republican, I wish it was that Ron Paul guy. And then he was always talking about Austrian economics. So I went to the Mises Institute, and you know, the Institute for Humane Studies was doing a video series called Learn Liberty back then, and there were materials from Cato and, you know, all these places. I was listening to the Tom Woods show. That was a particularly major influence on me, was getting, you know, a half an hour of libertarian education every day through his podcast, and all the guests that, you know, he had on. And that changed me. So between his 2008 campaign and his 2012 campaign, by the time we got to 2012, I was a diehard libertarian. Even though I didn't know a single other person in real life who agreed with me on any of those views, I completely, radicalized myself as a libertarian online, which is, I think, is interesting relative to what we were talking about before, where, you don't have these pressures anymore to, I don't mean social pressure. I mean kind of like situational pressure, where you have to, the only way to come to your opinions is through talking to the people around you, right? You can go find the people online, and then the people that end up being around each other don't always agree as much as they used to, and it becomes harder to form more local communities. That was very much my experience in college, where I was so passionate about these ideas, but nobody else agreed with me.
Yeah.
So I tried to talk about them all the time, and it did not ingratiate people to me. But it did make me, I think, talking about them day in and day out with people who disagreed with me, it really did, I think, make me a good communicator of those ideas, because I had to learn to not just talk to the bubble about them.
Where'd you grow up, and where'd you end up going to college?
I grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland, so the Washington, D.C. suburbs, and I went to college at New York University.
Oh, yes, NYU. Lots of Austrians there over the years.
Yes, and actually, my senior year, I did an independent study with Mario Rizzo, who's one of the Austrian economists there, because I knew I wanted to study Austrian stuff specifically, and so he did that with me and gave me readings to read, and I'm very appreciative of that. But I was a film and television major, so I didn't I didn't do much economics in college.
Yeah, Peter Betke used to be at NYU, but he's not there anymore. I think he's down at
He's Mason
or someplace.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to meet Israel Kirzner?
I did not. No, but when I was there, he was emeritus already.
Oh yeah, he's 93 or 94 now. Yeah.
And the way in which I did it, like, Rizzo was nice to do it with me, and I would have done that independent study a little bit differently if I did it again, because I actually, from my online learning, like, I knew so much more about it than I was sort of like willing to let on when I was doing that, because I didn't want to seem like, in the wrong place on the Dunning-Kruger curve, where I've read so much online, and there's these, online Austrians that think they know stuff but really know absolutely nothing about economics. And I actually wasn't in that place. I was further along, but so I sort of acted very naive in my sessions with him, because I didn't want to overexert my intelligence. But because of that, my education in those was maybe a little bit more basic than it otherwise could have been. So that's a shame. But, I think you only really interact with those sorts of figures, people like Kirzner and like all the Austrians in the department, if you're like at the grad school level. Like, I only interacted with Rizzo. Like, I went into his office, I think once a week or once every other week, and he would give me readings, and then we'd talk about it the next week.
That's awesome. That's a great story. Yeah.
It was wonderful. Yeah.
Also, did you by chance get to meet Chris Matthews-Skabara?
No.
Okay. You know what I'm talking about?
I know that does he run the Journal of Ayn Rand Studies?
Yes. And he's in Brooklyn. So yeah. So
I've read a number of his essays, but I don't know him.
You got involved with the Foundation for Economic Education. Of course, they had moved out. They were pretty much moving out of Irvington by that time. So.
Oh yeah, I think they were long gone. I don't know. I didn't do stuff with libertarians in person. I think there was supposed to be some libertarian student club that technically like existed on the books, and I went to seek it out once at like a club fair, but I couldn't find them. So, I spoke with Rizzo about economics, but that was it. Otherwise, did not know a single other person that agreed with me on politics in any major way until after I graduated, and then went and immediately after graduation did a program at the Ayn Rand Institute.
Yeah. How was your time at ARI? I gotta know about this. The
So
Ayn
I
Rand
did a
Institute.
3 week internship program
Yeah.
immediately after
3
graduating
weeks. Yeah.
college.
That's
And well, because it wasn't like when you think of an internship, you
yeah.
think like, oh, I'm going a place for a semester and I go in
Yeah.
1 day a week and, you know, I do work for this place, photocopying things or like whatever useless thing, just so I can watch the workplace.
Yeah.
And that's not what this was. I don't know why it was even called an internship. You spent like an hour or two helping with some tasks, but the
Mhm.
other 6 to 7 hours a day was classes with all their scholars, uh, um,
Oh yeah.
learning about objectivism. And then you would have homework at night, reading the essays for the next day. And then also everybody was kind of living in a hotel with each other for these 3 weeks.
Oh yeah.
So you made friends and you were talking about it with all the people like at night and stuff. It was a wonderful program. I hear they don't have the funding for it anymore, and so they stopped it. And I'm extraordinarily disappointed to hear that, because that was wonderful and really deeply affected my life. I later moved, I got out of the film industry because I just hated it and wanted to come work in the world of ideas. And I wouldn't have done that if I didn't have a good experience at the Ayn Rand Institute, and thinking in my head, like, boy, I had just such a better time at this organization. And I just, you know, oh, so I skipped an important part. So after the 3 weeks, they knew I was staying in LA. They're down in Orange County, so just an hour away. They knew I was staying in LA, like looking for a film industry job. And the head of their media production department at the time very nicely offered to like keep me on and give me some work until I got a film industry job. So I was working there, I think, part-time, 3 days a week for about 6 months, and just helping put together like this glorified PowerPoint that has been released as like the video version of Leonard Peikoff's History of Philosophy course. But the way we were doing it, it's so simple. It's just like make the text fade in on screen and like put the text here and have this be in the background and have the opacity be a certain amount. But the way that the film editing software was, you know, a decade ago, I was doing this. Uh, made it, and the fact that these are like 100 hours of lectures made that like a months and months and months long consuming process of doing all this rote work. But I so enjoyed getting to listen to Leonard Peikoff in my ears and learn so much about philosophy, having to listen to this course like 3 times through to edit the whole thing. And I loved that more than actually like working at these film industry places.
Yeah.
So, you know, I moved to DC and got back in the idea space, working at think tanks and stuff.
Who'd you get to work with at ARI? It was really great. If you want to
So
shout,
my boss there in the video production department was Michael Paxton. I think he hasn't been there in a long time,
I've
but
heard that
he,
name. Yeah.
yeah, he was the director of the film about Ayn Rand, A Sense of Life, in the early 90s, which was Academy Award nominated at a time where somehow a movie about Ayn Rand could get Academy Award nominated, which I feel like would never happen today.
Yes.
So, you know, he was great. And then in the period I was working there, I interacted with the scholars not at all. I was in like a different wing of the building. So it was just me and Paxton, and then me listening to Peikoff in my ears. But in the internship period, it was Ankar Gate, who was just fantastic teacher. Yaron was not like a regular teacher, but he came in a couple times. Who were the other people there? I'm blanking on their names. I think we had a session or two from Ilan Journo. There was a guy named Keith. I'm blanking on his last name, but he sort of did like the literary analysis of like
Yeah.
the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. He was fantastic. There was another guy. He left and came to a DC-ish. I think it was in DC think tank. He was really fantastic. He was tall. I can't remember his name, but basically, I mean, basically all the
Yeah.
scholars would come in and talk to us. So that was wonderful.
Yeah. You know, I have to say, if I could do something magical and give every younger libertarian an experience of a seminar at the Fee Mansion like I had, I would love to give that to
Oh,
you guys. I really,
that's wonderful.
that was just such, that was, I think the setting and just, it's more like a frat house than a hotel. I mean, you're eating all your meals together. I mean, that was just what an, I can't, I
I
can't, I can't think of any more amazing experience you could have.
I don't even know that I don't think they have things like
Yeah.
that anymore. I
Yeah.
worked there for a little
I,
bit, and
I went to the last
yeah.
event at the mansion was in August or September of 2014. And I went up just for that event, just to say goodbye. I took a bunch of pictures. I
Mhm.
wish I'd taken more. I wish I'd, went past some of the barricades and took pictures of those, because to have some memory of that building, because it was just so, it was, but, realizing now the way organizations are structured, they don't need a building like that anymore, unfortunately. But it was an amazing experience that you just stayed there.
It's worth it though
Yeah.
sometimes. Actually, in the period when I was working at the Ayn Rand Institute, one of the time when I would still have limited engagement with the scholars was, I think they would have like monthly or bi-monthly lectures that people from town would come in for, and so I would help film those, and those were fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, great learning experiences. More places should do stuff like that. It's one of the nice things about being in DC, actually, and there's been a lot less of it since COVID.
Yeah.
But you can go places and go to lectures and events and at the think tanks, and that's fun sometimes.
You haven't been around as long as some other people have, but I'm still asking because we're gonna have to go pretty soon anyway. But what happened to our movement in 2020? I just see it seemed like there were so many people who either said nothing or just were very, very it's like they were afraid to speak up against this stuff. I don't get it.
That is an extraordinarily complicated question, but what I will say is, I think that the idea that there are these more establishment-y libertarians, that they're not sufficiently radical. I think libertarianism is a radical philosophy. It should be a radical philosophy. And, I value having like agreement and alignment with anybody that I can. And if somebody's just 10% libertarian, I think that's wonderful. But you probably shouldn't have those people in high senior positions at libertarian organizations. And I think that they've been there for a long time. And I think that has degraded the quality of thought in the movement. And so there's no, they think that there's just kind of exceptions, or we apply libertarian strategy to this, but not all the way to the core, right? So it's okay to lock people down in their houses because the public health need overrides, but we should have very free market policy about how we do the vaccines or something, right? And we should have very free market policy about how we do the vaccines, but we should also not lock people down in their houses and shut down businesses and do all this stuff. So I think we need a little bit more Rothbard influence. I don't agree with Rothbard on everything, but I think I think the movement has swung way too far in the other direction, and I just see it continuing to slip at a lot of these organizations. I think 2020 was a symptom of a disease in the movement that had been building for quite some time. And yeah, I mean, just, this is the simple solution to me.
Yeah.
Call yourself, if you're, I don't want to name names, but for various organizations that are not like pure libertarian, but call themselves libertarian, just call yourself a classically liberal organization. I'll be very happy to work with you to spread your work. Even, I'll work at one of those places. I would take a job at one of those places. I'm a big believer in coalitions and like working together on stuff. But the problem is that they want to own the movement. And they actually want to own what libertarianism is. And so they want to expel a lot of the libertarians that are more ideologically pure. I think people like me, and that I'm bothered by. If you're going to talk about what libertarianism is, I mean, this is the philosophy of Rothbard, basically, and then rooting in people like Mises and Hayek. And it's substantially more radical than what's being taught now. You don't have to be a full anarchist. There's a minarchist tradition too, but either accept either accept us as kind of standard bearers of libertarianism, and it's okay to have some deviations, but we have a solid understanding of what libertarianism is philosophically, or else call yourself classically liberal, and just don't try to own this thing, because it's not yours.
I understand you don't want you, because I believe libertarianism is the true liberalism, but they've got to use another word besides classical. It's synonymous with being old and irrelevant. It's never going to take over with that word. But I forget to ask you, where does Dawkins, where is Dawkins politically? Would you say he might be like a JFK, RFK Democrat or something like that? Or
I don't know to describe it like that. I'm not saying if that's right or wrong. I think he's what a Democrat, if you were to put him in the United States context, he's British. I think that he's what a Democrat was 20 years ago, and he just hasn't really changed much. And he's still applying his principles, but in ways that are not in sync with how the current mainstream left is. So, I think all the major new atheists have gone the same way. He's no different than the rest. He's no different than Sam Harris in these regards. He's no different than Bill Maher. This is what Peter Boghossian. He's no different than the direction that all these major thought leaders have gone in. He's just in a different context now, so people are taking it differently.
Yeah, that's true. And when Bill Maher is good, he's usually very good. I mean, there's still a lot to like in Bill Maher, but I was, one thing I was going to ask, did you, I don't know where, we never really got to talk much, but I assume you were involved with the atheist movement when Elevator Gate happened.
I was not. I've heard a lot about it since. I've not been involved in organized atheism ever until I got involved in the group Atheists for Liberty, which I'm currently a chapter leader of. So when I was young and I was getting influenced by all these works, it was just through consuming it, which is, it makes it all the more rewarding to like meet and get to know some of these people now. That would be incredibly cool for my young self. But at the time, not in person at all.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you said we had to stop pretty soon. So where can we find you out there now?
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
It would be great having you. Yeah.
A lot of discussion questions I don't usually get asked. So I'd love to do it again. You can find me on Twitter at Joseph J. Klein, and then please on Substack at We the Black Sheep. And I just published this book we talked about at the beginning. It's called Redefining Racism. It's a history of basically this white on white anti-racist cult that has evolved into Robin DiAngelo, that calls itself anti-racist, that changed the definition of the word racism, uses a very idiosyncratic definition to be able to call themselves anti-racist, but is really this like horrible racist movement, and that has dominated, DEI education in schools and universities and workshops. So check that out. It's on all booksellers, but if you buy it through our shop at wetheblacksheep.com, I'll sign it. So those two places, Substack and Twitter.
I forgot to ask, have you seen Matt Walsh's movie?
Oh my God, I loved it. And I'm friends with the director, Justin Folk. So I was the executive producer of a movie he did a number of years back called No Safe Spaces. And Justin is just absolutely fantastic. I sent him a copy of this current book, and I hope he'll share it with Walsh. But that movie was great. I mean, and getting Walsh to be such a fantastic comedic performance artist, where he's just improvising this character and settings with people. I mean, that's an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. You have to be brave, you have to be sharp, you have to be funny. And What is a Woman was good, but he wasn't doing that in What is a Woman, and everybody should go see it. I think it's still in theaters. Go see it. It's funny, left, right. You'll like it as long as you're not an absolute crazy psycho about a lot of the worst DEI stuff. You're gonna like this movie.
Yeah. Okay. Well, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, go check out my Substack, go buy Mindful Escape from the Village, and go to Buy Me a Coffee to give me money. So thank you, Jake Klein. It's been great having you, and certainly when's the wedding with Salome, or do you have a plan yet?
Not on the books yet, but hopefully very soon. We get that question constantly, as you might imagine, for engaged people.
So I hope it works out.
Yeah.
And, you know,
the goal is sooner. The goal is sooner rather than later, but we haven't started planning yet.
Yeah, and thank you for coming on the show, Jake. I'm Chris Baker. We're out.